He found the ring in the McDonald's dumpster behind the restaurant. The way a person finds anything when they're down to practical needs and narrow choices. By knowing which bags are heavy with food waste and which ones are just paper and cleaning rags. By recognizing the crinkle of a fresh liner versus the sour sound of broken ice in a cup, Caleb Walker had eased himself up on the short concrete lip, braced a knee on the rim, and pulled a Tide trash bag toward him with that practiced mix of care and urgency people don't learn unless they've had to. Closing shifts at places like this threw away whole burgers and fries when orders were wrong or the time window expired. And they tended to double bag the food to keep the kitchen clean. If he could get a sealed inner bag onto the rim, open it without tearing the bottom, and keep the contents off the rest of the bin, he could eat something that didn't taste like bleach or yesterday. He wasn't proud of the method, and he wasn't ashamed of it. Pride and shame both took more energy than he had. His fingers slid over waxed wrappers and cardboard, then hit a hard, perfectly round edge wrapped in a napkin gone translucent with grease. He peeled back the napkin with his thumb and saw a gold band with a clean, bright stone that managed to catch even the gray alley light. It wasn't costume. The weight and the setting said this was real. He turned it once and saw tiny stamped marks inside the band that meant little to his eyes, but told him what he already knew. Engagement ring. The kind people save up for, the kind people plan around. The kitchen door was propped open 3 inches by a crate, and a crew member with a mop bucket pushed through the gap, clocked Caleb at the bin, and snapped to the default line. "You can't be back here." Caleb lifted his hand, chest high so the kid could actually see the ring instead of the jacket and the beard. And the story people write without evidence. "Somebody lost this," he said, keeping his voice level and his other palm open. "I'm trying to give it back." The kid's eyes flicked down to the metal, up to Caleb's face, then off to the side like he'd landed on a policy answer that didn't require a second thought. "Go to the front," he said, already swinging the door shut with his foot as if the conversation were a spill to be mopped. Not a thing to be solved out front? The dining room was in that weird hour between the last families and the after-school wave the booths, busy with high school kids. A pair of late lunchers talking into their laptops. 2 moms trading bites of fries while children negotiated napkins and straws. Caleb stood just inside the door, kept the ring flat on his palm so he wouldn't look like a magician with a trick, and tried the most boring sentence he could build. "Did anyone lose a ring?" A couple at the corner table looked at him, and then at each other, and then down. A cluster of teens at the soda fountain made the satisfied sound people make when they have a camera before they have a thought. One boy lifted his phone and framed Caleb like content. A man in a polo didn't even glance up when he gave the universal dismissal. "Put that away, man," as if the ring were a flyer. Caleb didn't move closer. He turned his other hand slightly to show he wasn't hiding anything, and added the fact that should have made this simple. "I found it out back, in a bag behind the store. I'm trying to return it." Can the manager just ask if someone's missing a ring? The assistant manager arrived at a brisk trot, headset cocked, smile gone. She met him where a line would be if there were one, set her posture like a wall, and said the policy phrase that had saved her from 100 complaints. "Sir, you can't solicit customers." He shook his head. "I'm not selling. I found this." He angled his palm toward her so she could see the setting. She flinched the way people do when they expect a prank and don't want to get caught on video falling for it. The headset tipped as she looked over his shoulder to the booths and the phones and the shift lead at the fryers. "Please step outside," she said. "If you found something, you need to turn it in to the police." He tried once more at the counter, asked the cashier if anyone could make an announcement. Just ask if someone lost an engagement ring and watch the cashier glance to the headset and back with the practiced helplessness of someone who needs the job. "We can't," the cashier said. "Please, sir." The teens at the soda fountain giggled like they'd won something. A mother pulled a child close, even though the child hadn't moved. A man muttered scam to nobody in particular. The story wrote itself in the room, and it did not include a sentence where a man who looks like Caleb returns a diamond in broad daylight. He stepped out under the awning with the ring still in his palm because pockets create accusations, and tried the quiet route with passersby, the simple ask, one face at a time. "Did you lose a ring?" Most people kept their eyes on the rain or their phones. A teenager did the fake grab motion and ran when Caleb pulled back. Two kids he'd seen at the soda machine walked by and said, loud enough to count. Dudes trying to hustle people with a fake ring and laughed at their own certainty. He could stand there until the sky cleared and not get any closer to the right owner. He could hand the ring to a manager who didn't want to see it and watch it disappear into a drawer with a shrug. Or he could take the one path that came with a form and a case number. The precinct sat 4 blocks east, a low square building with a flag and a short ramp and a bulletin board inside the vestibule with missing pets and bike. Registration reminders tacked to cork. He closed his fingers lightly over the band without hiding it and started walking. Half a block down, he heard the headset voice from the doorway of the restaurant. Half turned away, phone to her ear, eyes on his back. Yes, he has a ring, she said in the careful register people use when they think they are reporting facts. He came in showing it to customers. Says he found it. He's leaving now. Heading east on Maple. She turned her face to the wall when he glanced over his shoulder, then stepped inside. Satisfied with the work of that call the way people are, after wiping a table clean, the station lobby, it's the size of a bus shelter and smelled faintly of old coffee and new toner. Behind glass, a civilian clerk sat at a low counter with a metal tray that slid under the pane for forms and keys and whatever else could be explained on paper. Caleb set both hands flat on the counter with his fingers splayed so the clerk could see he wasn't hiding anything, and said the sentence the sign on the glass told him to say. I found a ring behind the McDonald's. I'd like to turn it in. The clerk looked at Caleb's hands, at the ring in his palm, then at his face, and chose to start with a question instead of a speech. Where exactly? In a Tide bag in the food dumpster, Caleb said. Wrapped in a napkin. I was looking for a meal, opened a bag, and there it was. The clerk reached for a found property form with the bored precision of someone who fills out 100 of them a week. And at that moment, the black desk radio chirped and read a call summary in that flat dispatch tone that pins a narrative to a voice. Possible theft from person at 2200 Franklin McDonald's. Suspect male. Mid-40s, gray jacket, backpack, beard. Last seen walking eastbound on Maple with a ring. The clerk's eyes shifted. Not in surprise, but in alignment. Words on a radio map snapping onto the man at his counter, and his left hand slid without flourish to press the buzzer for the side door. A lock clicked. The door opened. And an officer stepped through and scanned Caleb the way people scan a shelf for the label they were told to find. What's going on? The officer asked. Not hostile yet. Not neutral either. He says he found a ring, the clerk said. And we just got a theft call about a ring from the same address. The officer's name tag read Landry. He looked at the ring without, leaning in, and didn't ask a question before giving an order he clearly considered routine. Turn around, sir. Caleb blinked because his brain briefly insisted on the logic of the sign he had obeyed. And then he nodded at nobody and set the ring gently on the counter where both of them could see it. I walked in to turn it in, he said. Landry's hand was already at Caleb's wrist by the time he repeated turn around. Caleb did. The cuffs were neither tight nor gentle, the metal shock cold enough to reorder his thinking. Landry guided him through the side door to a small room with a table bolted to the floor. Another officer, Doyle, leaned against the wall with the relaxed posture of someone who believes the next 10 minutes will play out in the only way he recognizes as correct. What have we got? Doyle asked, without pretending he needed the answer. McDonald's theft call, Landry said. He was about to turn it in. The quote marks landed like a joke told to a friendly audience. Doyle picked up the ring from the clerk with 2 fingers like evidence and dropped it into a clear property bag, wrote a case number on the label, and didn't bother looking at Caleb. They clipped the cuffs to a short chain on the table ring so he couldn't lift his hands more than a foot. The choreography felt practiced enough to be a drill. Landry ran the checklist like a litany. Name, Caleb Walker. ID. No. Address. Shelter. If they have a bed 4th Street last. Night. Tell us about the ring. Caleb kept his voice level, because a flat voice carries better than a cracked one. I found it in a tied bag behind the restaurant, wrapped in a napkin. I went inside and asked if anyone lost it. The manager told me to leave. I brought it here because you logged found stuff. That's it. Doyle made the single note sound people make when they don't believe you, but don't have the energy to expand on why. Engagement rings don't come out of dumpsters. They do when someone drops one into a tray and scrapes the tray into a bag, Caleb said. Check the alley camera. Check the dining room. Check the street from there to here. The timing will match. Doyle shrugged, bored. Cameras aren't for your convenience. We'll handle the investigation. Landry leaned back in his chair and studied. Caleb, the way a person sizes up a broken thing, they assume they understand, and said nothing. Useful. The sergeant stuck his head around the door with the expression of a man delivering news that would not alter his afternoon. We've got an owner on the line, he said. Woman says she lost her ring near the trash while picking up after her kid. McDonald sent her our way. She's coming. Landry's smile was the kind that looks like a prize to the person wearing it, and like a verdict to everyone else. Perfect, he said. Open and shut. Caleb leaned forward until the chain went tight and answered a question no one had asked. If she says it's hers, good. It still won't make me a thief. They didn't reward the sentence with a response. They moved him to the bench outside the holding cell with a short chain, clipped to a ring so his hand sat neatly in his lap. Whether he liked it or not, two men sat inside the cell, one staring at the floor tile with the blank stare of a man measuring time, the other with his eyes half closed like he'd learned to rest anywhere. Landry talked sports with Doyle as if this were a break room and not a place where facts had cost. Caleb stared at the paint seam where two grays met and wondered how a room could be both too loud and too quiet at once. Down the hall, he caught the low exchange between the sergeant and someone at a monitor. Pulled the alley cam, the sergeant said, not whispering, but not projecting either. Shows him at the bin. You can't see the exact second with the napkin, but the timeline fits. Dining room cam has him near the counter with his hand up, manager steering him out. Street cam at Maple catches him heading straight here. No stops. Doyle made a small sound that wasn't quite a concession. So he found it. Looks that way, the sergeant said. We'll take the complainant's statement, log the property, and let the ADA tell us how to write it. None of that altered the feel of the chain against Caleb's wrist. When the front door buzzed again, the lobby filled with the particular energy of someone well-dressed and very certain. He heard the clerk's voice switch into professional warmth, Landry's tone slide toward something like charm, and then the firm rhythm of heels on tile. The woman who stepped into view wore a dark coat and carried herself like lists lived in her head in alphabetical order. She scanned the hall in a single sweep. Her eyes landed on Caleb, and her expression shifted from polite focus to that smaller, trickier thing recognition, pulling up a memory that doesn't ask permission. Is that him? Landry asked, already stepping to the side as if presenting an exhibit. The woman ignored him like he was an errand and addressed Caleb as if the chain didn't exist. We've met, she said, not a question. 2 months ago, Broad and 6th, I fell in the crosswalk, my bag spilled. You picked everything up and walked me to urgent care. Caleb nodded once. Yes, ma'am. You twisted your ankle. We called a car from the pharmacy because it was raining. She turned to Landry without softening her voice. Why is he cuffed? Standard procedure, Landry said quickly. We had a theft call and have to assume you have to observe, she said. Not raising her volume, just removing the wiggle room from the room. Have you checked your own cameras? Landry tried the line about reviewing evidence for reports. She cut him off like flipping a switch. Show me now, the sergeant, who understood both the chain of command and the difference between a fight worth having and one that wasn't, gestured toward the monitor room. Landry followed, because his smile didn't have a script for this. Doyle stayed, leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, and let a thin smile sit on his face like a dare. Big day for you, he said. Caleb kept his eyes on the doorway where the sergeant and the woman had gone, and said nothing. Not out of strategy, but because there's nothing to say to a sentence that only exists to test your patience. The sergeant returned first with that particular look. Bureaucrats wear when a complication has turned into a correction. They can't ignore brows not quite up, mouth not quite down. Unclip him, he said to Doyle, and then to nobody in particular. Listed as found property turned in by Mr. Walker. Doyle's pause was half a breath long, and still too long. Then the key turned. The little snap sounded. The chain came off, and Caleb rubbed the red line on his wrist the way you rub a bruise you didn't earn. The woman stepped back into view with a clear property bag in her hand and the professional calm of someone who filed grievances in complete sentences. "It's mine," she told the sergeant, and then to Caleb. As if that were the only transaction in the room that mattered, and you brought it in. "Thank you," Caleb nodded. "Didn't want to carry it around," he said. It was true in 4 different ways. Landry tried on a tone that probably worked on people who came in angry and left tired. "Glad we could resolve it, ma'am." We responded based on the call. We have to assume she didn't bother to pretend to listen. "Your video shows exactly what happened," she said. "Please update your report so it reflects the facts, not the fear." The sergeant nodded with the weary speed of a man choosing a small loss to avoid a bigger one. "We will." Caleb's stomach chose that elegant moment to remind him of the errand he'd started with, loud enough to startle him and audible enough to make Doyle smirk. He looked down at his shoes, not because he was ashamed, but because eyes have a way of turning hunger into performance. "Have you eaten?" The woman asked, not with pity, and not like she was offering points. "Not yet," he said. "I was going to after." She nodded once like a judge delivering a fine. "We'll fix that." "Sergeant, he's free to go?" "Yes," the sergeant said, and the word felt like a door opening onto a hallway instead of a field. She turned to Caleb. "My name is Olivia Grant. I'm not going to make you tell me the same story for the 4th time. I'm going to ask a different question. Would you be open to work that's simple, steady, and written down? Groundskeeping. An apartment over a garage comes with it. Pay on the books. If either of us doesn't like it after a month, we end it clean. If you want it, it's yours. If you don't, we're done when you finish eating." Caleb looked at Landry, not for permission, but out of the reflex that comes from too much time in rooms where other people hold the pens. Then back at Olivia. He did the math he always did when the word help showed up in a sentence. "What's the angle? Where's the camera? What's the trade?" Her voice didn't carry the notes people use when they're filming their generosity. "I don't want charity," he said, because clear as kind and because he needed to hear how she answered. "It isn't," she said. "It's a job with a key and a schedule and a list. You did the right thing today, and you did the right thing when I fell in the crosswalk. I trust you to keep a yard neat and to show up when you say you will. That's the whole job." He nodded once, felt the hunger slide back a half step, and said, "I can try." They didn't make a ceremony of leaving. Olivia thanked the sergeant, ignored Landry's attempt at a parting line, and matched her pace to Caleb's as they crossed the lobby. At the glass, Caleb turned to the clerk and did the only piece of paperwork he could control. "Please note in the report that I turned it in," he said. The clerk, who had the kind of face that looks like it remembers small decencies, nodded. "It will," he said, and his tone said he meant it. The vestibule door buzzed. Outside, the rain had shifted to that fine mist that sticks to your eyebrows and makes the streetlights bloom. Olivia's car chirped when she unlocked it. Caleb held the door frame a second longer than most people do, because being invited into a car that isn't a cab or a cruiser is a different kind of balance. Then he slid in and kept his palms flat on his thighs like a man learning anew, position that might turn out to be a job. He didn't know the next hour yet. He knew what he wanted on the page that would outlive the hour. Found property, returned. Finder, Caleb Walker. The rest food, a yard, a key, a month written in ink instead of air. Olivia didn't ask questions on the drive. She used the short distance to put the immediate mess behind them. The diner 2 blocks from the precinct was the kind of place where the coffee is always hot and nobody tries to sell you a story with your food. She took a corner booth, asked the server for 2 plates of the fastest decent thing the kitchen could send. Potatoes toast stand waited for the plates to land before she said anything that sounded like a plan. Caleb ate like a person who knows enough to pace himself even when hunger tells a different story. Breaking the toast in halves, pushing the potatoes to the side so they'd cool, keeping an eye on the coffee level without acting like anything in front of him might vanish. She watched the room the way a parent watches a crowded pool, casual on the surface. Counting heads in the back of the mind sketched the next 3 hours in plain terms. A quick stop at her property manager's office for a one-page contract drafted from a template they kept, around for seasonal grounds help. A drive to the house to walk the yard and the apartment above the garage. A hardware stop for gloves if the shed didn't have a pair in Caleb's size. And then back to the office to collect the keys once the ink was dry. She didn't try to sell it, or to make it sound bigger than it was. She was good at plans because she knew the difference between a skeza and a speech. The property manager's office sat on the second floor of a low brick building that smelled like toner and carpet cleaner. A receptionist with a tidy desk and a quicker-than-average smile waved them into a small conference room and handed Olivia a printout before any introductions. Olivia skimmed the page, crossed out 2 sentences that made the apartment feel contingent, on extra duties as assigned, and slid it across to Caleb with a pen. The font was big enough to respect tired eyes, and the paragraphs were short enough to make sense without a lawyer. The paper said, "Grounds assistant," listed a simple hourly rate, named the tasks: mowing, edging, leaf blowing, hedge trim, snow shoveling, sprinkler check. Basic sweep handbag pickup spelled out that the apartment over the garage came with the job, and set a first review at 30 days with either party able to walk away with a week's notice after that. Caleb read it the way people read things when they've signed stuff that hurt them before once without moving. Once, line by line with the pen uncapped in his hand, once more skimming for the trap he hadn't noticed yet. Then he tapped 2 places with the pen and asked the kinds of questions that tell you a person learned the hard way. Could they add a line clarifying that the apartment key remained his during off hours, and that he wouldn't be asked to let guests into the main house? And could they state clearly that any small tools he purchased himself remained his property at exit? Olivia nodded. The manager wrote both lines in neat block letters, initialed the margins, and printed a new, clean page, while the receptionist made a copy of Caleb's shelter slip to satisfy the office's ID box. He signed where the X sat. Olivia signed under that. And the manager peeled a barcode from a sheet, stuck it to a key envelope, and wrote garage apt yard shed. Gate in ink you could read from across a room. They drove to the house without commentary. The kind that adds noise without adding value. The place wasn't a mansion. It was a 2-story from the 40s with smart updates, a yard that looked like someone had cared about it but had been busy lately, and a detached garage with steps up the side to a small apartment that didn't pretend to be anything else. Olivia unlocked the gate, showed Caleb where the keypad lived, and walked him through the yard like a foreman on a job site. This hedge line tends to grow uneven on the south side. This maple drops branches heavy after a storm. The sprinkler head sticks whenever grit gets in line too. This path heaves a ½ inch in January and settles by April, so don't try to grind it flat. That hose bib leaks if you don't close it tight. The city pickup hits Wednesday morning before 7, so bag by Tuesday night. Caleb didn't nod at everything to look agreeable. He asked the small questions that keep big problems from rolling downhill later. Where was the main sprinkler shutoff? Who handled licensed repairs? Which neighbor had the dog that broke leashes? Where the green waste bin lived when the lid cracked? And whether anyone else had a key to the shed. Olivia answered without embellishment, and when she didn't know an answer, she said so and wrote it down to ask. It felt less like a tour and more like a handoff. Inside the apartment, Caleb stood just past the threshold and let his eyes map what 4 clean walls and a working stove looked. Like when you weren't trying to talk yourself into staying. The couch was small but sturdy. The table had 2 chairs that didn't wobble. The bed didn't sag. And the bathroom didn't smell like the last tenant, which is the difference between ready and almost. He opened a cabinet. Not because he was nosy, but because empty shelves with nothing hiding at the back are their own kind of relief. There were 4 plates, 2 bowls, 2 mugs, a cheap pan that would work until it didn't, and a roll of paper towels. He set the contract copy in a drawer, put the key envelope on the counter, and watched his own hands for a second to make sure they didn't shake. He wasn't a man given to visible emotion, but keys make noise in your pocket that a body isn't used to after months of holding everything you own in a backpack you never let out of reach. They walked the yard again with a notepad in hand this time. Caleb measured the length of the north hedge with eye and stride, noted which mower width would keep the passes clean, and wrote a simple sequence for the first 3 mornings. Bag the trash the wind had gifted. Trim the hedge line square so the rest of the lines had a frame, and run the sprinkler test mid-morning to catch any heads that would turn a sidewalk into a surprise. Olivia didn't suggest aesthetic touches. She said what mattered practically: the street stays cleaner when the strip is edged. The maple drops in late fall, so don't put away the rake too early. The wind whips flyers into the corner by the gate, so you have to fish them out twice a week. The snowplow piles exactly where you don't want it, so be ready to shovel a second berm. The steady, useful density of those notes settled Caleb's shoulders in a way his speech never could. By late afternoon, they'd looped back to the office for a laminated copy of the gate code and the shed inventory list the last groundskeeper had typed up months ago. Olivia bought 2 pairs of gloves at the hardware store, 1 medium, 1 large, because the labels lie and you won't know until you pull them on, and a rake with all its teeth, because a man shouldn't have to start a job fixing a tool as a prelude to doing the job. She didn't pretend the broom in the shed would be fine. She looked at the frayed edge, grimaced, and added it to a short punch list for morning delivery. The manager slid the final keyring across the desk at 5, with a code card and an email that said welcome, without marketing fluff. Olivia didn't take a photo. Caleb didn't pose. They didn't make it into anything that wasn't work. That first evening, Caleb did the only ceremony that made sense to him. He put his backpack in the closet, hung his jacket on an actual hook instead of folding it at the foot of a cot, put the found property receipt from the station in a drawer like a piece of paper that didn't need to ride in his pocket anymore, turned the tap on the shower to a temperature that felt like kindness, scrubbed until the steam had something to do with water and not just air, put on the shelter t-shirt they'd once saved for interviews, and ate an apple from the fridge as if it were a new invention. He tested the deadbolt twice, because muscle memory does not update in an hour, set the keys on the table where he could see them from the bed, and lay down in a room that did not have 6 other men breathing like it was their last night of winter. When he woke in the dark once to the old sharp panic that something he owned had been taken while he slept, his hand hit metal on wood without moving more than 6 inches. He went back under fast. He started before 8 the next morning because early work looks like respect. He tied a trash bag to his belt loop, walked the lot line with his eyes on the ground, and picked up what the wind had driven against the hedge's candy wrappers. A receipt, a bottle cap, those thin napkins that turn to lace when they get wet, 2 cigarette butts in the exact place you'd expect if you'd ever watched someone hide a smoke from a spouse. He stacked sticks by diameter near the compost bin because dumping in a heap makes next week harder than today. At 8 on the dot, a delivery van rolled up with a box broom, its hose nozzle, hand pruners, a coil of twine, and a fresh 5-pack of contractor bags. He signed without fuss, put each thing on a hook he'd assigned already, and started in on the hedge with the body mechanics of someone who'd learned not to fight the tool to pass as light. 1 correcting bite, step back and check, then fix the proud pieces rather than pretending you'll like them later. By 10, the line looked like a line. Olivia, on a call by the kitchen window, lifted a hand without turning it into a wave. He didn't stop for the acknowledgement. He kept the rhythm until the job cleared, then swept the path and hosed the dust down so the work looked finished instead of interrupted. He ate at noon on the apartment steps because a porch lets a person sit without feeling like they're loitering. A neighbor slowed, leaned out the window, and asked if he was the new grounds guy. When he said yes, she said, "Looks better already," the 4 words that carry more weight than the 10 paragraphs people put in emails when they're trying to be seen doing a good deed. He nodded once and let her drive off without making it a conversation about anything else. The afternoon was sprinklers. Zone 1 cycled fine. Zone 2 sputtered twice, and then cleared. Zone 3's head near the south walk stuck like Olivia had said it did when Grit found it, and he fixed it with a twist and a soak instead of a wrench and a prayer. He made notes on a small pad he kept in his back pocket, Z3 head for sticks after wind. Flush, reset. Retest Tuesday, because notes are how you respect the future you that will forget which head you meant. He coiled hoses in circles instead of figure eights because circles don't kink if you're tired. Stacked the rake and the push broom where they wouldn't fall and make you think a person was at the door. And took a slow look back up the walk to see the thing he'd done today so tomorrow didn't eat it with a new list. Back across town. The paper trail shifted in the unglamorous way that tells you the right person was a little embarrassed. The sergeant walked the amended report to the front desk himself so it wouldn't get buried. Under traffic fender benders and noise complaints, the box that had said theft from person investigation pending, now, Reed found property submitted by finder, and under it, in language as plain as a label on a jar, sat finder, Caleb Walker Walken. It didn't mention cuffs, because reports tend not to admit the parts of the procedure that look bad when read cold. It did include a line about the alley camera, the dining room camera, and the street cam, which meant that the next time a call like that came in and a clerk heard a walk-in say, "I found a ring," the muscle memory might route to form 11B instead of buzzer. Side door. The assistant manager at McDonald's told her team at the pre-shift huddle that the ring had been returned and that if a customer said they lost something valuable near the trash, they should keep the person there and call her rather than announce it over the speakers like a game. And then she blew past the detail where she'd told the police she thought a man had stolen it because once a story resolves, nobody likes to relitigate the part where they guessed wrong. The first week at the house held exactly the kind of small problems that make a job feel like a job instead of a favor. The green bin lid proved it wouldn't stay up without a shoulder, so Caleb propped it with a cut-down broom handle until a new hinge arrived. The neighbor's maple did indeed shed a fat limb in a wind that lasted 40 minutes. He sawed it into thirds, so a person with a bad back could move it into trips. The gatekeep had decided the 3 in the code only worked when you pressed the corner of the key. So he took a picture of the plate, emailed the manager, and carried a physical key in his pocket until the call box vendor swapped the panel. He swept the leaves on the sidewalk twice in one day when an afternoon gust rearranged his morning math and didn't get mad at the wind, 'cause anger won't push a leaf to the curb. He answered one delivery question at the front walk with a "packages go to the side door, ma'am." Main door is private, and his tone made it a rule instead of a debate. He learned the sound the boiler made just before it. Kicked to life in the way the yard smelled when the sprinklers hit the warm walk at 6 p.m. He slept through the night 3 of 7 nights the first week and 5 of 7 the second, which is how you measure progress when you're not trying to impress anyone. At the end of the second week, Olivia asked if he wanted the apartment fridge stocked on a schedule or whether he preferred a stipend. He said stipend, because he'd learned to buy exactly what he'd eat and didn't like, throwing food away any more than he liked pulling it out of a bin. She handed him a store card loaded with a modest weekly amount and a line that said it would refill on Mondays. Told him to text the manager if it ever failed to load, and added a sentence out loud that mattered more than the plastic. "No questions about receipts unless the card stops working." He said thank you, in a tone that sounded like "I'll handle it," which was the right answer. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks in, the same officer from the report landry rolled past slowly in a cruiser, eyes out on the yard. It wasn't a harassment drive-by. He was on the block for something else, and his gaze stuck because he'd seen a face from a report where the paper hadn't been flattering enough to live with. He didn't stop. He didn't wave. He kept going. Caleb saw the car, recognized the posture, and put a check mark next to edge sidewalk on his pad without turning the passing look into a story bigger than it was. A minute later, a city truck rumbled through with a crew to clear a storm drain down the block cones, flashing amber. 2 workers in neon vests, joking about coffee, and the day went back to the kind of normal that earns its name. When the first heat wave of the season hit, Olivia came out with 2 bottles of water and a question about whether an earlier start made more sense. They moved the core hours to 7 to 3, with a long break at noon and a short evening walkthrough after the sun dropped. Not because it sounded like a magazine article about work-life balance, but because trimming hedges at 2 p.m. in bad heat is a fast route to mistakes and stitches. She added a line to the paper schedule on the side of the fridge, and he moved his alarm to 6:10, as if he'd been waiting for someone to say the thing that made sense. The first payday landed on the card from the management office without a hiccup. He moved half to the credit union account a case manager at the shelter had helped him open months back, kept some cash for small things, and left the rest alone. He bought socks, not a television. He bought a hat that kept the sun out of his eyes instead of a speaker that would turn the yard into a radio. He walked to the shelter one evening with a box of decent but extra leftovers from the house and handed it to the desk in a way that didn't read like "look at me" and didn't read like "I owe you this." It read like what it was. Someone using a fridge that wasn't there last month to move food from one shelf in the city to another at 30 days. The review wasn't a meeting, it was a walk. Olivia and Caleb went around the yard together, and she pointed to the exact, ordinary things that deserved words. The hedge line held level because he kept checking it. The strip by the curb looked like a line instead of a shrug. The sprinkler heads weren't drowning the walk. The compost didn't smell because he was turning it. And the maple stump he'd cut flush would save a trip later. She didn't talk about initiative or attitude. She said, "This looks right, and that corner stays neat, and the neighbor mentioned you were polite about a package," which is the language that keeps a job sane. Back inside, she slid a short envelope across the table with the week's stipend ticked up a hair because cost of living had moved a hair, and an updated contract that removed the 30-day trial clause and extended the same simple terms in 90-day blocks. He signed without feeling like he'd agreed to a trap. She signed without feeling like she'd adopted a project. They both went back outside, 'cause the day still had work in it. There were calls and texts in the periphery that said the city was still the city. The precinct captain replied to Olivia's earlier email with a polite thank you, and a line about re-emphasizing front desk protocols for found property, which is bureaucratic. For we told people to think twice before cuffing. Someone who walked in with a thing, the assistant manager at McDonald's changed to closing checklist so the alley camera's angle got logged once a week instead of once a quarter, which meant the next time someone dropped something expensive with a tray, the video might show it landing instead of just the bag sliding. A neighbor who'd watched too much nightly news asked Olivia if she felt safe with someone like that living over her garage. Olivia said yes, in a tone that ended the conversation rather than moved it to a committee. A boy on a bike asked Caleb if the rake was heavy. Caleb said, "Only if you try to lift all the leaves at once," which made the boy laugh and then, later, think the ring itself lived where rings live once they've stopped being the center of an afternoon. Back on a hand that moved through a day full of other tasks, visible only when the light caught it, mentioned in conversation exactly twice once, when a friend asked, "Did you ever find it?" And Olivia said yes, and once when her husband said, "Glad that worked," doubt, and she said, "Me too." It no longer tried to carry the weight of a whole moral. It went back to being a circle of metal that meant what two people decided it meant, not what a lobby decided to accuse someone of. On a Saturday morning when the heat broke and the maple threw good shade on the walk, Caleb took a slow lap of the yard with a coffee that didn't taste like it came from an urn, set the mug on the porch rail, and knelt to pull a small line of crabgrass from the edge with his fingers, because pulling with your hands is sometimes faster than getting a tool. It wasn't a scene, and it wasn't a symbol. It was a man doing work in a place where the work made sense. Olivia stepped out with a list for next week's mulch drop, and a question about whether a small herb bed in the side patch would fight the sprinklers or play nice. He said it would work if they amended the soil first and set the timer to mist in the early morning instead of midday. She wrote that down. A package truck idled at the curb, and he pointed the driver to the side door without anyone getting in a mood. The neighbor with the maple waved once and kept walking her dog. Nothing remarkable happened to wrap the day in a bow. Remarkable had done enough lately. Much later months, not days, Caleb walked back past the McDonald's on his way to the credit union and saw the Assistant manager he recognized out front, wiping the metal tables with a rhythm that said she did. This as many times a week as he trimmed the hedge. He could have kept moving, and no one would have blamed him. He stepped close enough to be heard without making her flinch and said, "I wanted to tell you the ring found its owner." She looked up, searching his face for a second, then landing on recognition without the defensiveness this time. "I heard," she said. "We updated our process." He nodded. "So did I," he said, thinking of the note on his closet door that told him which day to check the sprinkler filter before it clogged. It wasn't the same kind of process, but the city runs on the tiny loops we make to save the next stranger from the afternoon we had. If you'd asked him to write his story down at the end of that first month, if a clerk had slid a lined page under glass and said, "Tell us what matters," he wouldn't have written about the video or the cuffs or the diner coffee. Not in the way people who didn't live it would expect. He would have written 6 words on the top line and left the rest blank for someone else to staple to an outcome. Found property. Returned finder, Caleb Walker. Then he would have put the page in a drawer that closed, checked the hinge on the green bin, and gone back outside. Because hedges don't square themselves, and work done right in the right place writes a better paragraph than anything a person can say about it.